I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
No, listeners, we're not starting a fight club. This is our episode talking about David Fincher. This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In this episode, we'll cover a filmmaker, actor, or a director, or what have you, who shaped our love of film. So, as Alex introduced, or we teased in the beginning, today's filmmaker that shaped our love of film is none other than David Fincher.
Yes, and not only do we choose Fincher because I think he's one of both of our favorite filmmakers,
Mm-hmm.
or at least filmmaker we follow, he does have a new movie finally coming out this fall that will probably be out by the time this episode is out, called The Killer, streaming on Netflix. So it's been 3 years since his last film, so we're both very excited to see The Killer. We will not be covering The Killer in this episode because we haven't seen it yet, but
Right.
that's well, Fincher's on the top of our minds. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about why he's an important director to me, and then I'd love to hear sort of your take before we go into his film. So, I first knew of Fincher through Seven when I was in high school. That was a movie that we'll get into it a little more later, but it was definitely incredibly shocking, bold, different, felt kind of dangerous. I mean, everyone was talking about it at school in terms of what they got away with in this movie. So it immediately I was drawn to that film, and then followed his filmography pretty much ever since then. And actually in the this was also when I was starting to develop a understanding of directors and had like my favorite directors, both who are no longer with us and also active. And he was immediately one of my favorite active directors. I would watch all of his films, got all the DVDs. He had incredible directors' commentaries that I'd listened to and sort of felt like I was going to film school with Fincher. Love his behind the scenes interviews, would always read all of those. I actually was one of my first jobs in Hollywood was working in a post-production company that was his he didn't own the company, but we did
Mm-hmm.
all of his commercial work, a lot of his film work. So I got to see him in meetings, and
Oh,
we were
wow.
doing the effects for Benjamin Button, which was a big effects driven movie that was all effects developed by the company I was working at. It was just awesome to see him just around the office and sort of listen in when he was sort of in his work mode, because I just like, oh my God, David Fincher, like he's making movies and in that other room. So that I have a personal connection
That's
to him in
amazing.
that way. But yeah, he's still to this day, I think, it's just a fascinating filmmaker. We talked about recently a Stanley Kubrick movie on a recent episode. He's my favorite director of all time, and I feel Fincher's the heir apparent to Kubrick in the sense of incredibly controlled. Everything in the frame is exactly what he wants. He has a very specific vision that he's trying to get out, and I just really appreciate that type of filmmaking, like the craft that and every single thing is what he's trying to do, and they all have a meaning. And I like dissecting that meaning. And that's another reason why I love watching Fincher's films over and over again, because there's every little camera move is for a purpose, and I love
Mm.
trying to figure out like what that is. And he's made some amazing films too. But his filmography is very few duds in there. But what about you? What was your first Fincher experience, and what are your thoughts on him as a director?
Yeah, I mean, stating the obvious, he's kind of a master of the art form. And as we will do on this podcast, kind of track his filmography, it's fascinating to see that his obsession with perfection, movement, music,
Mm-hmm.
angles, all of that was there so early, and it sort of continued. My personal relationship with him is interesting in the sense that I think I came to him with Fight Club
Oh, okay.
and admired that terribly, and but I feel like for a long time I admired his movie, but I don't think I felt that hard connection because
Okay.
he's not often going for that. And then also, just reading more about like the 70 takes and the perfection and all of that, there's a time when I used to find that a little bit grating because,
Mm.
my kind of movie making, not that I've made any movies per se. I mean, I have some short films, but doesn't
Mm-hmm.
count. But to me, so much of like the art of filmmaking is about making things effortlessly, and the spontaneity come through. Doesn't mean you're not prepared, doesn't mean that you're not putting in the work. You got to have a vision, you got to sort of really know what you're going for, but also
Mm-hmm.
leave room for spontaneity. And that's where performance comes in, and that's where kind of that otherworldly, yeah, we are playing pretend on a text that was written by somebody else, but suddenly something else is happening here because of the spontaneity. So I don't know. I used to wrestle with that in my
Hmm.
mind. Not that I've ever been on a Fincher set. So this is all through just reading and looking at these movies that are brilliantly crafted, but there's a distance because they're
Hmm.
so manufactured and perfect that it's sort of hard to kind of get into them. At least it was for me, from in like a heart kind of a way. And then we'll get into this. I think Social Network changed that for me,
Hmm. Interesting.
where it sort of started to feel that there's a lot more going on, and I started to appreciate that. Okay, you can probably create spontaneity and there's that otherworldly magic to take shape and form by just repetition, because you
Hmm.
get to a place where you've done it so many times that now you're no longer just remembering your lines and delivering them, or doing the way the things were storyboarded, because it's sort of become like second nature, muscle memory to you. And
Right.
the line between who you are as a person versus who you are in the movie as an actor or whatever department you're a part of is starting to now blur. Because so I started to appreciate that more.
Hmm.
And then I think Gone Girl, which I've covered in one of my past episodes, in our past episodes, further kind of hit that home, that okay, even in a genre movie setup, this person can really play with the art form and also play with the human psychology quite a bit. There's a lot of depth to these movies, whether you want to see it or not. There is always a lot of depth. It turns out the depth is usually on the darker, ugly sides of humanity.
Hmm.
But so yeah, I've had a very interesting journey with him. And I caught myself because I would buy a lot of his movies but never rewatch them again,
Oh,
because
interesting.
I just
Oh,
never wanted
okay.
to go back in that headspace. And
Ah.
I kind of questioned myself, like, why is this the case? Because I had such a great time watching this in the theater and obviously admire him. And I think it was everything that I just talked about. And I think now it's changed. Now I do go back and watch, and I think Social Network really did that.
Interesting. Yeah. I also like whenever we bring this up about just techniques of film
Right.
that we're on sort of opposite ends. Movies for me, if there's more of that craft there, that is what elevates it. Like I get more excited about the art if I know about what the control that the artist is putting into the film, which is why I like directors is following them so much, because there is that sense of control that they have. And I like directors that have more on the Kubrick Fincher side than the, let the camera kind of do whatever. Like a Richard Linklater, for example, who's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
free and just like, okay, we'll figure it out on set and we'll do this thing and kind of figure it
Mm-hmm.
out. I definitely prefer gravitate more towards those artists that are a lot more like, I have a vision, I'm going to enact it. And that is what sort of gets, makes me love the film if I know there's that. So I just love whenever we bring that up, because there's an interesting duality between the two of
Yeah.
us in terms of how
I'm
we
more
approach
about
films.
balance, kind of in the middle. Like, I don't want loosey goosey either, because I will lose interest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there has to be a vision and a style, and what are you trying to get out of your actors, and what story are you telling, but also leave room for that spontaneity, and not like browbeat everybody into whatever your control vision is. But I think I've grown to appreciate and admire a lot more of that style.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't start that way for sure.
Well, speaking of starting, let's dive into Fincher's filmography. And
Yeah.
actually, David Fincher is not the first director we've covered on this podcast, but the first director where we need to actually go outside of the medium for film, I feel like, to talk about the beginning of his career. He is of the age of directors who came up within music videos and commercials. Now, he's not the first generation. Ridley Scott came from commercials in the 70s, and that's what got him in, and him and his brother. But this in the 90s, all these filmmakers that were coming up, and he's part of the, they call the class of 99 of all the filmmakers kind of broke through in that year. A lot of them did start in music videos and commercials. And I think talking about those a little bit would sort of give better context to where Fincher kind of came from, and also where a lot of these music videos, especially if you go back and watch them, his style is right there. A
Oh
lot of
yeah.
his camera movements, the mise en scène that he likes, the darkness, but also the way that he tells stories. I think the thing that I love about his music videos. So, for example, some of my favorite ones would be like Aerosmith's "Janie Got a Gun," the Madonna "Express Yourself" video, Michael Jackson's "Who Is It," and then the music video from George Michael, "Freedom 90." And there's a mix between videos that tell very specific stories, like "Janie's Got a Gun" is the song is about a girl who's molested by her father, and then she gets a gun and shoots him. And
Mm-hmm.
David Fincher, basically, the music video plays out like a short film where you see the father, basically gonna go molest the daughter, and you see the mother, and then you see him get killed, and it's very cinematic. And I think you can already tell that he has this ability. And there's even some great shots when you see the dad's dead body on the ground after the daughter shot him in the head, where the camera starts inside of the hole in the back of his head and pans out. So then you see the body, and that's stuff that Fincher does. I mean, even to this day, where he brings the camera into places cameras can't fit with, like, digital cinematography. So it was fun going back and watching these videos and seeing a lot of that. Even in the Freedom 90 video, there's a shot where the camera goes into a coffee mug and then comes out sort of the other side. And you can see this already in his technique. So he already has his style already, like before he's even made his first movie. Is curious of like what, if any, music videos kind of jump out to you. I don't know if you were watching music videos a lot in India and if these songs kind of traveled over there, like Madonna and Aerosmith and George Michael. Any comments on his music videos?
Yeah, the Madonna one and the George Michael one, definitely. And of course, I didn't even know who made these, but was totally blown away by what these were. And yeah, I guess we didn't mention this, like, cool is synonymous to this guy.
Yes.
From an early, like, maybe we are also 90s kids in the sense that we were teenagers and coming into our own in the 90s, most impressionable age in terms of pop culture influences and such. And
right.
And like nothing else defines cool. And I think a lot of that has to do with the camera techniques that you're talking about. I think he understands movement really, really well. And you see that even right in everything that he's done since, but it's very evident in the music videos. And then it's kind of the darker side of storytelling, clothes and angles and use of accessories and how these people are presented and done up. Like all of that is just cool. You want to be a part of it instantly.
Oh, definitely. I mean, especially that Freedom 90 George Michael video. If folks haven't seen that, George Michael's not in the video. It's just all of the top supermodels, male and female at the time, just mouthing the words to the song as the camera kind of moves around them. And I think you're great about the movement piece too, because a lot of times, music videos can just be where the camera's sort of static and the editing is, not much editing, just like, okay, here's some dancers and they dance, and that's sort of what you're trying to capture. Whereas what Fincher does is he'll edit to like the beat of the song. He'll cut at the right moment. He'll and especially in that Freedom 90 video, there's a part of the song in the chorus where there's like cymbal crashes, and there's a scene when there's George Michael's jacket is in the closet and it starts catching on fire, and the flame will explode with each cymbal crash as it starts engulfing the jacket. It's like, wow, like he already knows how to incorporate music, which is something he does so well in his films too, of just like into the technique of making the video. It's not just here's some dancers and they're dancing around, or the singer's there just singing the songs. Like, no, he will use these cinematic techniques to improve the quality of the video. And it's just from right then and there, it's just amazing to see it.
Totally. And also somebody who I think was very aware of what does it mean to create iconography?
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like the jacket, like you mentioned, or like we were living in this time of, top models and supermodels, and these were known names. Like even where I grew up, like you knew the top 3, top 4 models. That doesn't happen now, of course.
No, exactly, yeah.
And I think he knew how to capture that, harness that, and elevate that even further. And which is amazing. Like he's been such a huge part of creating this iconography since, the beginning of times.
Oh, definitely. I mean, another example of that is the Rolling Stones video he did, Love is Strong, where, if folks haven't seen that, it's black and white, but the Rolling Stones are walking through New York, but they're the size of like Godzilla or something. They're larger than life. And New York is a city that's larger than life. The Big Apple, it's so big, and seeing the Stones larger than the one of the big cities in the world makes them seem more epic. And the way that he's shooting them, like a lot of low angle shots, and it's just like the city looks great, but they all seem these epic legends. I mean, this is 90s Stones, so they've been around for 30 years, and it's definitely that bigging up even their image, which, I mean, you can't get bigger than Mick Jagger, but Fincher makes him seem even larger than life, which is another great video that I like too.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
So then at the end of this first phase of his music videos, but he finally gets into Hollywood and makes Alien 3, which was a critical and financial flop. And he actually hated the experience, and kind of for a while was saying he would never shoot a movie again, and he was just going to go back to commercials and videos. And this is a film that was so I like I mentioned, I came into Fincher with Seven and then followed his career moving forward, but I didn't immediately go back to watch Alien 3, even though I love Alien 1, the Ridley Scott film, and the James Cameron Aliens, which we actually covered on the podcast before in our Mother's Day episode. Those are some of my favorite movies, but Alien 3, I heard it was bad. I kind of didn't watch it and have since obviously gone back and seen it. And it's not a good film. You can tell there's a lot of studio meddling, which there was, but Fincher's vision, at least of visually, is all there. Like you can tell this is David Fincher from the camera angles, the shadows, the much more darker tone just on this film. I mean, this movie starts out with two of the main characters being killed in the opening credits, and then now Ripley's left alone. So it's not like your dad's Alien. It's a totally different world. It's a lot darker, which again plays to Fincher's sensibilities. Have you seen this film, and what are your thoughts?
I've
I have
never
not
seen it, and maybe I should go and see it. But yeah, the discourse on this movie is just so kind of throbbing that I just was like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I would say for as a completist of both the Alien franchise and of Fincher, that would be the only reason really to watch it. I will say too, there's also it's not a director's cut version, but it's called the assembly cut. Essentially, the studio was in the late 90s, released a DVD box set and asked all the directors to go back and make director's cuts of the films. And Fincher refused. He's like, I hate this movie. I just own it. I don't want to touch this again. So they're like, well, we've got to sell DVDs. So they went back and found a lot of his footage and assembled it in a way that was closer to his original vision for the movie, which is interesting. Like, again, it's not a director's cut, so it's not his actual signing off on this, but there's things that actually work a lot better in that version, and then also things that don't work so well. So, I mean, again, the movie is just still kind of a mess, but I would recommend if folks haven't watched the assembly cut, just to check it out. Even if you didn't like the original theatrical version of Alien 3, it's interesting. It's interesting take. So now we're moving into the second phase of his career. It really kicks off with Seven. Now, I mentioned this was the movie that got me into David Fincher. Just a movie at the time was a bit of a phenomenon, at least like of kids our age, or at least on the schoolyard in Boston, of just like, how did this get made? All these horrible things. I mean, it's a serial killer movie where people are getting killed in the styles of each of the seven deadly sins in this grotesque sort of, you see all the bodies and very, very dark film, like visually, but then also tonally, and a super shock twist, dark ending as well, that everyone was like, I can't believe that's how they ended this movie. That is definitely something I remember seeing for the first time. Like, oh my God, like I've never seen a film go there before. Seven, what was your experience with this?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I don't think I've seen it since.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay,
I probably should go back and watch it as an adult, but some of those images are searing for sure. I don't think anybody has seen Brad Pitt in that light before.
No.
That's the other thing that Fincher does and will keep doing in his career, is kind of pick these movie stars and present them in a very different, darker kind of tone, and kind of bring out their ugliness, but also give them a platform to kind of really play with material. And both him and Morgan Freeman are amazing in this movie. It's obviously very dark, and it's sort of, kind of is the beginning of this phase of his career of making genre movies.
Yes.
But also, I guess, foreshadows all of the darkness in his mind of kind of, mostly lonely, troubled men.
Right.
Doing terrible things and what have you. It sort of all starts here.
No, that's definitely true. And because when we move on to The Game, which is a film that we covered on our Money episode, that is, again, a darker film by a troubled man, Michael Douglas, with also a bit of a twist ending too. Then Fight Club, which was your first entry into to Fincher. And this movie also is very dark. Troubled men with also a very famous twist ending as well. And this movie just was also one that, even though it flopped at the box office, immediately became like a cultural phenomenon. One of the first DVDs I bought, like, was constantly being played in every dorm room in college. And I've seen this movie dozens of times, and actually just rewatched it just on a whim recently. And it still just is so unique and powerful and interesting. And yeah, what is your Fight Club take?
Yeah, I mean, the funny take, which is not a take really, is that everybody around me watching this and sort of feeling, oh, this is like serious and how it should be, versus I'm like, no, this is a cautionary tale.
Yeah, and it's a comedy too.
It's a comedy too in many ways. So that was always hilarious to me that so many people around me were just like so blown away in like a serious way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing. Quick shout out to Helena Bonham Carter in this movie as
Oh,
well,
yeah.
who's absolutely incredible. Nobody else can really do that. It's sort of a signature Helena Bonham Carter kind of take. I do
Hmm.
want to go back and watch it. I haven't seen it in years and years. But it's interesting just talking about all these movies in this phase together that I wonder how much of it is intentional on Fincher's part, that these are all movies that are going to shock and surprise, and
Hmm.
how much of that is almost a retaliation from the Alien 3 experience, that, oh, you think I don't know what I'm doing or I'm not welcome here, from the music video world into the
Yeah.
movie world. Let
Yeah.
me show you. I'm going to throw all the tricks. I'm going to make this dark and ugly and shock you that you would just not be able to escape me, even if you don't want to engage with me. It sort of feels like that a little bit.
No, it totally does. And also a middle finger too to Hollywood, I think. Of
Right.
like, oh,
That's what I
we're
mean.
gonna
Yeah.
make this movie with a dark twist ending of Seven, and we're gonna do in Fight Club and make it about like, are we pro men just beating each other up? And then
Right.
the end of that movie, they succeed in blowing up all these banks or even, again, the game too has a bit of an unexpected twist ending
Yeah.
as well. So you're right. I bet it is something where he's sort of like, okay, screw you guys. I'm going to push the boundaries of conventional Hollywood filmmaking to kind of get back at what you did to me on Alien 3 and
Yeah.
took it away from me. That's a really
And
good
put
point.
like, famous movie stars, which who we are not seeing. I mean, Michael Douglas, I guess we've seen him kind of portray this character or a
Hmm.
version of that, but not the other ones. So that's another kind of middle finger, right? That, oh, I'm
Oh
going to
yeah.
put screen legends and movie stars in these kind of really dark, grotesque, blood covered worlds.
Yeah. No, that totally. And then the final film of this phase of, like we said, sort of these genre pictures would be Panic Room.
Yeah.
And this is a film that I've grown to like a lot more than when I first saw it. I thought it was simple and in a weird way. Like now we're just talking about these other films where they all kind of had sort of twist endings to them.
Mhm.
At this point, I think I was expecting as a fan to have that. And every Fincher movie would have some kind of twist at the end. And this does not have that at all. It's just
Mhm.
a very standard, like Hitchcockian thriller, but I think is again, it's only grown in my admiration for this movie. It is simple, but that's kind of the point. I think he was stripping everything down after Fight Club failed at the box office so much. And it was such a
Mhm.
complicated film, and there's so much going there. He just went, okay, we're just gonna be super simple, tell an amazing, Hitchcockian thriller tale, and it's great. Jodie Foster's fantastic in it. Forrest
She's
Whitaker's
great.
great. I watch this movie quite often. Actually, go back to it. And it still really holds up. You thoughts on Panic Room?
Good to hear. I have not seen it in a while either, but yeah, Case 2 is great. And I remember The Kitchen
Hmm.
from this movie, as well as, I guess, Panic Room as well. Not Panic Room, sorry, Game as
Oh, the
well. They
game.
all
Oh, the
have like
nice
great
kitchens.
interiors. That's the other thing, like his perfection for like interior design,
Hmm.
which we will see across various movies, starts to come up here as well. But this is right, the thing, what I said up front, that it took me a while to kind of fall in love with what he was doing, which is why I've not gone back and rewatched this early phase. And maybe now is the time for me to do that.
Yeah, you should in preparation for his new one. I think
Yeah.
these movies were movies I watched a ton in college, like all of these, like constant rotation. It's actually the later films we're about to get to that I haven't
Hmm.
gone back to as often, actually. Well, let's move on to the third phase, which kicks off with Zodiac. So this is Fincher expanding beyond just these genre films that he was doing a lot in the last phase into more prestige dramas. Now he's chasing or getting, I'm not sure which is which, critical acclaim. The during this phase, both Social Network and The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons are in here, and those got a lot of Oscar nominations and again critical awards and things. And this is not something that had followed him through that 90s phase. And then Dragon Tattoo was sort of the end of this, I think, of him
Mhm.
continuing to try to go after prestige, but also bring some genre elements back in. And that was not as successful at the box office, or actually, I think that's its weakest film, personally, other than Alien 3. So, of those films in this phase, Zodiac, Benjamin Button's Social Network, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, what sort of stands out to you? What are your thoughts on this phase?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is my favorite phase of his, to be honest, because I think he Yeah, you could say he's chasing stuff, but I look at it as an expansion and elevation of a filmmaker
Hmm.
who is, maybe growing up a little bit and not just responding to revenge or showing the middle finger, but, expanding his scope and telling more complex stories that, touch lots of different aspects of human emotion and the experience. So obviously the two heavy hitters are Zodiac and Social Network.
Right.
Social Network probably is the best movie of the last, like, since it came out. It would be in the top three, I would think, if not, in the top 100 of movies ever made as
Yeah.
we, move into the century further. So I think that movie is kind of a culmination of all of his aspects in my mind of
Hmm.
control filmmaking, every single art department at this full display, from the score to the cinematography, but also a great pairing with the right writer. I think I
Mm.
don't think he'd had a Sorkin before. It's a
Right. Right.
controlled storytelling, but it has the heart and the emotion which Sorkin tends to wear on his sleeve sometimes. It's a
Yeah.
good balance between the two, which that's why this is my favorite, because it has the most heart connection. And then not to mention this movie is forever relevant given what's happened and what will keep happening in the world, So great performances from the entire star cast. And then Zodiac is just kind of a masterwork. It's a harder movie for sure. It's a long movie, but
Hmm.
I know you've covered it in the past in one of our episodes.
Yeah. The San Francisco
Um,
episode, we covered
exactly.
Zodiac.
So
Yeah.
again, a masterpiece there. The other two, I think Benjamin Button to me is the weakest. I still
Mm.
enjoy Girl with the Dragon Tattoo
Oh, okay.
or what it is. I
Yeah.
quite enjoy it. I think, what's her name? My gosh, Rooney
Rooney
Mara
Mara.
is fantastic in it. Like, to see her do that and then watch her in Carol and all the other movies that she's done is kind of incredible what he's gotten out. And maybe that's the thing I should call out. I think his ability to work with actors and get something otherworldly out of them
Hmm.
is what's at display in this phase, more so in the second phase where it was more about the filmmaking and the craft, and
Hmm.
the actors are of course part of it, but not in this way.
Yeah,
What do you
that's a good. I agree with that. Yeah, the performances I think stand out a lot more in this phase, especially in for me Zodiac and then Social Network in particular.
Yeah.
The performances that he's getting out of his cast are up there along with the filmic techniques that he's using. Not that the actors in the other films weren't good,
No.
but it is another level. I think that's a really good point. For me, Zodiac is his masterwork, and
Mm.
that is a movie that I, especially the director's cut version, that I go back to more often even than Social Network, which, as much as I love and admire the film, just the direction the real life people have gone in since this movie makes it almost hard for me to watch
Mhm.
the movie.
Mhm.
I want to go back to it, but I haven't in a long time just because of my aversion for the real life people that the movie portrays. But this is definitely like his most acclaimed phase for sure. And then after Dragon Tattoo, we move into the final phase, which we're into now, which is Gone Girl, Mank, and then the forthcoming The Killer. And this is him returning, I think, more to the genre picture, but taking a different spin on it. And I think you were mentioning this before we started recording, that these feel more personal to you.
Mhm.
And he wants to tell these stories and not just tell a good serial killer story like with Seven, or what he's trying to do with Panic Room. These mean something to him. Both Gone Girl and particularly Mank, which his father wrote and then passed
Right.
away, and he was trying to get that screenplay made for 10 years. What? Yeah. Anything else you want to add into to this phase?
Yeah, in a weird way, and we've covered Gone Girl in the past in one of my episodes previously. I sort of feel like the more I think about it, Gone Girl might be the perfect summation of his storytelling,
Mm,
because it has the twisty ending, storytelling. It has the
yep.
dark, perverse side of who we are as humans. They are some brutal, violent acts, but
Yes.
at the same time, there's a lot happening beneath the surface in terms of society and media and relationship between men and women, marriages. Like, it's such a rich text, not to mention casting Ben Affleck,
Yes.
an extension of his own life into this movie. So in a weird way, it sort of feels like Social Network, Zodiac's headiness and depth combined with a lot of the genre tropes that he had, amassed
Mm,
in the first phases of his career, all put to great use. Also, darkly and deeply funny
yes.
as well.
Hmm.
So, yeah, the more I think about it, I feel like Gone Girl rises in my estimation of his career and is kind of a perfect portrayal of all of his things.
Yes, I agree. For me, this movie gets better and better with every year and is entering into the top three Fincher movies. I actually, as you mentioned this and sort of mentioned those comments and put it in the context of personal, I also wonder too if because the main female character in this movie who fakes her death and is trying to frame her husband, like she has a plan and she's trying to control everything.
Uh-huh.
In the same way that Fincher too, as a director, is trying to control and put together his actors and all the different craftsmen that are involved, and he's trying to do this thing, but it's probably frustrating when things go wrong, and that's essentially what she's doing too. She's directing this fake story of this murder that didn't happen, and writing a script of this diary that they find, and trying to manipulate all these different people, and then it starts falling apart and it frustrates her. And I wonder if part of Fincher is like when things start falling apart, he gets frustrated, and it sort of feels a lot like her character in that film. Like maybe he relates a lot to the killer in that movie in some way because of that sense of all she's trying to do is control everyone and control everything.
I love
What
that
if there's
take.
something there?
It's funny that maybe this character, Amy Gunn, might be the closest to who he is.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah,
Yeah.
who knows? Yeah, yeah. And then I will say with Mank is a movie that I actually did really like. It
Me
doesn't get
too.
talked a lot about, but I find it was very interesting in that he was his first, I think, overtly very political movie. That there's a
Mhm.
lot of things I was not expecting when I saw the movie to make it, or that it I was not expecting it when I saw the movie for it to be such a political movie and take all these political stances. And I think that I really need to go back and rewatch Mank. I've only seen it twice, and I do want to go back and watch it again. But that was surprising. It's something he hasn't done. And I think that gets back to this personal aspect. And yes, his
Mhm.
dad wrote the screenplay, but I wonder if he is sort of responding to the climate we were in post 2016 and just a lot of people
Right.
becoming more political. And he wanted to then tell that tale in this age we're in now.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I need to watch it again. I feel like that movie also is reminiscent to me now of just COVID because it kind of came in that deep 2020 year,
It
which
did.
is
Yeah.
unfortunate. And it's interesting, like David Fincher will forever be known as one of the key people who ushered in the streaming era of like the golden age of streaming era television, right?
That's
With
true. House of
House
Cards.
of
You're right.
Cards and
Mindhunter.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and now his association with Netflix continues. And yeah, I can't help but wonder if Mank was in theaters and had that kind of experience, of course it was in a COVID year, so I'm glad we at least got to see it.
Right. Right. Right.
Would it have had like a different life versus
Mm,
now it sort of feels like it's on the platform amongst like a bajillion other things, and
mm.
am I actually gonna go and watch it? Like, do I have any kind of experience memory with it versus like I shared in my Gone Girl episode, like I have this memory seared of that experience of being shocked
Yeah, with the
in the
audience in the
theater,
theater. Yep.
with the
Yep.
audience. The theatrical nature of his movies is I think pretty important. Like it mostly is
Right.
for most filmmakers, but especially for him. So I wonder that this new phase that he's in, where a lot of these movies are going to come out on Netflix, including The Killer, what sort of relationship do they develop? At the same time, we've lived through a pretty vibrant sort of real crime thriller genre on TV through HBO miniseries and such. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's something to that. So I don't know. All I want to say is, which might be a good segue into what we think Fincher should be doing next.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very top, I would say make more movies for the theatrical experiences.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that. I will be out of town when The Killer first comes out in theaters, and I'm worried I'm not out of the country actually. Worried I'm not going to be able to see it in theaters before it goes
Yeah.
right into Netflix. And I do feel that robbed Mank of some specialness and uniqueness because it wasn't in theaters. Maybe it'll
Mhm.
be re-released at some point now that COVID is past. But yeah, no, it's I like that he's still making movies, but I'm fine with him partnering with Netflix. I mean, they clearly have a very strong relationship that goes back a decade. However, I want to make sure that they're still creating a much rich theatrical experience for all of his works too, because I do think they always look better on the big screen. In terms of what he'll do next, I mean, it's interesting as I think about it because he's sort of touched every genre that exists in some way. I mean, maybe not musical, but the rest of even Fight Club, I'd argue, is his version of a comedy in many ways. So yeah, for him, I mean, I'm glad he's back to making these more personal genre films. Again, I think that maybe it's lazy to say, but him doing a Western for me, for some reason, that's a genre that I feel every great filmmaker should have at least one Western in his or her canon. And I would just love to see what he would do with something that is more open vista. I mean, maybe he wouldn't do the open vistas and the big open West. I mean, maybe he'd want to do something more self-contained, like a Hateful Eight, where it all takes place in one space. Because claustrophobia is something that he does very well. But I'd love to see him tackle a Western. That's a key American genre he hasn't yet touched. What about you? What do you think he should be doing next, or would you like him to do next?
I love that. I wouldn't have even thought of that idea, but I would love to see a Fincher Western. I think there's so many I was thinking about this. Like, he hasn't really done an out-and-out science fiction movie.
Alien 3, but I think he's disowned that. So you're right. Like, that is true.
I even forget about that. Yeah. So
and so does he. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be fun to see him maybe go back to that in that case and do it the way he wants to do it, and maybe mix some like real relationship drama. Like Ad Astra comes to mind, the James Gray movie. Like I think Fincher could really do something like that. He's not done a war film. I think it'll be fun to see Fincher tackle. Every great filmmaker, like you said, has a war movie. So I think that would be fun. And then thirdly, I was thinking of just picking up the relationship drama aspects of Gone Girl. I would love for him to go back at that and look at another relationship. It could be romantic, it could be between friends, it could be something else, but explore it, the dark twistiness of it all. So maybe more of a romantic comedy, but done in a Fincher style.
I would argue that Gone Girl is a romantic in Fincher style. Yeah. That actually is also a movie that I feel like with Fight Club is the closest he will get to actual comedy. I mean, that movie is hilarious in many parts, even though it's very dark and twisted at the same time. There's definitely comedic moments. So that would be interesting to see him lean more into that, I think. I'll definitely be there opening weekend or right in front of my TV if it's only on Netflix with my remote in hand. But hopefully they'll all still be in theaters in some way.
We've been doing these filmmaker, actor focused episodes for a little bit now. Would love your feedback on it. We've seen some good traction, but we always like to try and keep improving in ourselves and what we put out there. So yeah, would love feedback on that.
Yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment on the video and let us know other filmmakers, actors, writers, directors that you'd love us to cover. We'd love those suggestions. And yeah, this was really fun. Hopefully listeners enjoyed our trip down a dark corridor that is David Fincher's filmography. And you picked up some new movies maybe you haven't seen of his. And hopefully folks are excited about The Killer as much as we are to see what he has next. So make sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice. Leave us a rating and review. It helps us be found in the algorithm to new listeners. Also, just a reminder that we have a YouTube channel where you can go and look at all of our individual film reviews of every movie we covered on the podcast, which now is maybe over 200 films. And until next time.
All right, we'll see you next time.
What's in the box? What's in the box?